All right, welcome everybody to another episode of our Puget Systems Podcast. This is a special episode where we've kind of decided to add in, as part of our potpourri of content, these sort of event debriefs when we go to a show or a convention, a big event that is related to kind of what we do. Internally, we have a debrief of the folks that we send out there. They come back, they tell us all the cool stuff that they saw and learned and how that is going to apply to the business. So we thought we would share that with you guys, our audience. I always like to start off with our guests. Go ahead and give yourselves a little intro of who you are and what you do. Matt, we'll start with you.
So I'm Matt, been at Puget forever. I focus on post-production mostly. So what are people doing in post? How can we make sure our systems are designed for it? Which is why HPA, we're talking about HPA Tech Retreat, which is the Hollywood Professionals Association. And it sounds like it'd be right up my alley, post, but actually post rarely came up. It was interesting, what they actually ended up focusing on.
Yeah. And Jared?
And my name is Jared Lewis. I work in business development here at Puget Systems and also technology consultant. So I help match workflows to hardware, for a better way of saying it. So always trying to keep up on what's latest trends in every industry, latest trends in hardware, how do those things match and interact. So it's a great chance to get together with probably, as you know, the unheard side of Hollywood, those technical minds behind all the magic that we see. Really, really cool to see it. Not only that, but get some info on how they're using technology. Sometimes that stuff doesn't always come up in the day-to-day. So really, really a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I totally missed that part. The event we're talking about is the HPA Tech Retreat. Thank you, Matt, for mentioning that. I'll be better about this in the future. First time we've done this kind of episode. So that is interesting to hear that the post side of things wasn't really talked about a lot. But as always with this show that we do, it is always cool to see more of behind the scenes of how the content that we end up consuming at the end product is actually created. A lot, like you said, a lot of times we don't really get to see or hear about how the magic is made. So I guess let's just start off. What stood out to you, Matt? At the show?
I think actually, even keeping it back a step for a second here, because HPA, again, it's Hollywood, but the one thing that kind of surprised me at this event is actually how much there was broadcast. So actual live events, think Fox Sports, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of focus on broadcast, and I think some of it might just be because this year they do what's called a super session. So it's a whole day, and everything is on one topic from different people, different angles, but it's one topic. And this year the super session was virtual production, so everyone thinks Mandalorian, big LED walls and stuff, and that was a big part. But also really. Things like green screen is kind of the same thing, and then you're sending a 3D environment. They've been using that for news and sports for years now. So that might be part of it. It's just hey, this is that big topic, and hey, look, live broadcast has been doing it for a while. It's just a little bit different. It's not an LED wall. It's all done in the computer rather than in camera. Right. But so yeah, it was interesting how much it was a session with Fox Sports and things like that.
That's a good thing. That's a good point to kind of clarify that a lot of, especially sports broadcasting, seems to be on these sort of virtual sets. You'll have somebody kind of walk out onto a bit of a stage, but everything around them, even probably the floor that they're standing on, is all digital. It's painted in or comped in live in the moment. And sometimes if not for working here, I wouldn't really have realized that either. You just kind of accept that as a thing. But yeah, it's really interesting to see where this sort of technology has kind of wiggled its fingers into things without us really realizing it.
Yeah. Well, and even some of the sports things, what I find hilarious is sometimes they make it look like it's a big bank of TVs. And no, it's all fake. It's not actually TVs, but they make it look like it's TVs to make it be I don't know, so you can get it, but right. So they make it look real, but no, it's not at all. And then other things that they have the dancing robot. And,
Yeah. In fact, the closing night keynote was Fox's vice president of basically technology properties and such. But one of the things he emphasized was how those two worlds are blending, and they used to be very, very separate. Not only we saw that sort of first with the performers, as weird as that sounds, it used to be that if you were in movies, you didn't perform on television. That was kind of beneath you.
Oh, sure.
As we've seen television become more serialized with streaming, we've seen actors sort of move fluidly between the two. So it makes sense that you see the way that they produce the two. Pardon me. And they actually spoke one of the first night presentation was about the Super Bowl halftime show and how it was very much done with cinema. And it was fascinating because you have to coordinate different camera formats, camera styles, and there's so many things within that, each of those cameras, bring that all together and have this cohesive thing that goes out without a hitch. And from a technology perspective, yeah, it's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, so we mentioned like virtual productions. To me, I think there were three main categories. There was virtual production was biggest one by far. Mm-hmm. Cloud always comes up, especially in these guys' things, because half the time when they're talking about cloud, they're talking about distribution. So like Netflix,
okay.
Cloud, rather than like working editing in the cloud. Okay. Yeah, I mean editing kind of did too. And then the third one was AI, artificial intelligence. That always seems to like come up, like especially if anyone's been to like NAB. Like there's been AI sessions, like dozens of them a day for like 4 or 5 years.
Sure.
So some of it's that. But yeah, this year, actually, if you mind switching to my screen, if you have it up.
Yeah.
So one, if you want to check out HPA, like it's just hpaonline.com. But the cool thing that they do is they actually have like photographers there taking pictures, and then they put them all out. And so I brought a couple up just for people to kind of get context of like what it's like.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't really make it bigger, does it? So it's just like, a whole bunch of people in a room, everyone having to wear masks because, it's still mask mandates and stuff. That wasn't what I wanted to go. So a bunch of people in a room. But what they did interesting this year is they had 3 LED volumes set up on the end of the room. Because, again, they're talking a whole bunch about virtual production and LED volumes. And so they just had, 3, demos. Honestly, I don't even remember who the companies were who were doing them. I don't even know if they were really focusing on the companies. This is more just like, here's everything that goes into it because, hey, you probably want to start using it. So that was interesting that, like, yeah, it was that much of a focus for virtual production that they actually brought in companies to do things on site for these kind of things. Because it's a lot of work to get that stuff working.
Yeah.
And there are some things like, okay, they went kind of bare essential things working only, and they just barely made it. In the 4 days of setup they had, because like they weren't moving the camera at all. Like the camera was just static. It was more just like, here's what the tech is, and so you can have people to talk to and everything. And that was other stuff.
And they did have it to a level where they had several live environments, and you could see on the monitor exactly how it. So even in that informal of a setup, you could see, how it presents. And it's just amazing, to see what it's capable of. And this isn't, as Matt said, this is low scale. This is not a full studio setup.
Right.
Yeah, but just hearing about all the problems and all honestly, it was actually more, they were talking about the cons more than the pros, because I think with this crowd, they understand what the benefits is. Sure. Like getting in camera, like lighting, and reflections and all of that kind of stuff is kind of like, okay, yeah, they get it already. Knowing that, like, hey, if you want to shoot a golden hour scene or near sunset, you can just do that all day. Like, that's not a 30-minute window where you're trying to fit it in. It's a whenever you want. Hey, yeah, you want like environment to be like rain or like nighttime environment. You don't have to like do that in post, like, shoot it at 2 p.m. and then make it look like nighttime.
Yeah, that's funny.
So like
when he talked about that, he said pitching this to different producers, and he said, what if I can make it golden hour for as long as you want? And I remember thinking of movies like Field of Dreams was one where they talked about so much of that movie occurred at sunset, like the last 30 minutes, and they had to go back for days and days and days to try to get that continuity. That's huge. Yeah. Or even the ability with the with the new tools for focus. There's so much that you can do. Eliminates a lot of problems and allows creators to just create.
it also adds a lot of problems that they were talking about.
Sure.
Like what were some of the ones? It was one, cost. Although cost is actually like it's interesting. Like they're saying some of these volumes it costs like $100,000 a day to rent it out. But like, okay, how expensive is it to get your entire like crew out to New Zealand or wherever you want to shoot? Like it's going to be way more than that. So it's actually like cost almost isn't like a factor. But it changes their workflow entirely. Like usually you'd shoot things and then like, okay, you want to add in effects and, things in the background. Like you want to make it look like you're in a field, but really you're just like in front of a house. Normally you do that in post. Now you do that in like you do that in like a previs state. So it changes the workflow where a lot of the like heavier, harder to do things aren't done afterwards the shoot anymore. Now they have to do it before the shoot, because like you really want to get it right in camera, and so it's just completely altering everything. But it's also cool to hear how they're using this not just for like LED volumes. Like, okay, if they have to make this all ahead of time, well, heck, they can do all of their things like blocking and camera angles. They could do that all ahead of time, so that when they get on shoot, like they're not like trying different things. It's like, all right, well, here's the shot we want it to be. The camera's going to be here. We're going to do a pan in or a tilt or whatever, and done. Nice. And like, they don't have to like try a whole bunch. They're also talking about expanding this to do like virtual location scouting. So they still want to shoot a lot of things, on site at at other places. And so you can combine things like Google Earth with like some basic 3D models, and you can see how like what would this location look like at 2 p.m. on this date. And like you can see like, oh yeah, the shadows will go this way, the sun will be over there, and like so they can like scout out locations even ahead of time, which that's a pretty cool use, in my opinion. But like, oh yeah, if you already have all these things in Unreal Engine or whatever, it doesn't have to be just for the shooting. You can use it for the planning.
Yeah. I feel like that's got to help out with just overall production in general. Having like Unreal, or I imagine a lot of it is Unreal. I was going to say Unity, but it's probably a lot of
it's mostly
Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
I remember there was an article about how for Avengers Endgame, they had basically the whole final fight scene planned out like 6 years ago, or 6 years before the thing even come out. It was all gray and no textures or anything, but they knew what they were doing years ahead of time. And I imagine that helps out quite a lot in the end.
Yeah, because I mean, honestly, the time of like technicians, like people who do like the post work, the work in Unreal, like they get paid really good money, but it's nothing compared to like the directors, the VPs, the actors. Like, man, if you only have to have Nicolas Cage there for one day instead of a week, like, that's like half your budget. That's a lot of money. So it saves them a lot of time. But it was also interesting hearing how it shifted the workforce kind of. Like it came up multiple times. The main problem they have right now isn't the technology; it's the people who can like do it. Yep. They're moving to Unreal, and like, well, none of these guys know how to use Unreal. Even if they have people who are like very good like animators or VFX, they're heavy in like Houdini and Nuke and all that stuff. They've never touched Unreal. They don't know how it works. And so that's one of their biggest hurdles right now is just the people. And but it's interesting to me though, because like we look at Unreal and we're like, oh yeah, there's so many people using it, because like you only have to pay. Isn't it you only have to pay based on your like actual game sales or something? So it's like otherwise free.
I think there might be some other limitations, but I think it's over 1 million in sales. That's when you start paying the royalty to Epic.
So it's like there's all these indie game devs and all this kind of stuff, and yet they're talking about how they have a shortage of like labor. And so I'm not sure if it's just because they don't know how to get those people, or those people aren't interested. Like they want to make the games. They don't care about making digital environments for our next Marvel movie. Or it could be like a workload kind of thing. Because I know like Hollywood is not the industry you go in if you want like a peaceful,
I bet.
kind of a work. So it's just really interesting hearing about all that too.
Yeah, one of the things they spoke about, especially with this next generation that has come up so much more with these digital virtual environments, was how we talked about how broadcast and cinema were merging, but they talked about how they're now going to gaming to poach talent, for lack of a better word, not the best way to say it, but also to look for music production. How are you structuring? How are you all the things that basically we're seeing in gaming that are going to start. So when you think about how many things Unreal is used for, I think it's going to become much more common in the future to have these individual talents that bounce between whether it's cinema or broadcast, or because these virtual environments, the way they're created, are becoming they're so far from obviously having something standardized, but the way that they're interacting now, it's becoming this multidiscipline. So that was something Matt said that I really picked up on. Multiple times we heard about the need for talent, the right people.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting to hear that that maybe they just that they aren't stealing like from video game development or pushing, I don't know, either recruiting from colleges or whatnot to get into that sort of thing. And it's interesting to hear that there's a lack of talent when, I mean, there's how many million people are in game development and in particular, like environmental or playing around with that sort of, heck, Kelly Shipman, our 3D design guy, he used to be an environmental artist. And so it's just interesting to hear that that's a problem.
It might also be that, like, okay, there's a lot of people out there with the technical skills, but it's using Unreal in a way that they're not, is not how they trained. It's not how they learned. Like they learned Unreal to make a game, which is very different than using it to, okay, now you've got to put cameras in and it's got to follow. It's like basically making cutscenes. And that's like all you're doing is making cutscenes. Like it's probably a little bit of a different like skill set. Like you've got to think about framing and camera moves and stuff rather than just like make an environment and go.
I think with the explosion, as you talked about the explosion of studios and work, there's so much. It's probably there's so much demand that top talent is probably booked pretty far out right now. I imagine.
Yeah. There was a little bit of talk about like cloud stuff too, but mostly again in this context, it wasn't like using Premiere Pro in the cloud or doing editing in the cloud. A lot of it was like more like VP work or like camera switching, environments and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that came up was, hey, now that we can do things in the cloud, I don't have to bring someone on site. So now like this person that I usually fly out to like every set, it's like they're just constantly flying. Now they can stay home. Now because there's no travel time, they can do 3 times the work. So it's also like they're also figuring out how to be more efficient with the people they have. Because like, if you don't have to fly someone to, to the UK and then to the US and then down to Mexico and then up to Brazil or whatever. I guess that's not up. But it's like they can save a lot of money and help with the labor in that way.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I'm curious, because I've seen quite a lot of advancement in like metahumans and these sort of almost, I guess, fake people in a sense. Did that come up at all?
Yeah. So here's okay, what was this called? What was it called? Oh, Alter Ego was the show.
Oh, cool.
So if you look up Alter Ego, I don't know, it's probably some big show. But what they are doing on that is the singing one. They have people who are singing. It's just completely motion captured, face capture, and then the person is never on stage, but they put their digital avatar on stage, and then the people are watching it. And what's interesting to me is they actually have crowds there. Like there's live crowd. But they can't see it because it's like a digital avatar, so it's not actually there. So what they were saying is that what they do, I don't know if any of these shots actually show the crowd, but they have just like TVs like on the opposite side of where people are sitting, so it looks like they're looking at like the digital person, but actually they're just looking at a TV that's outside of frame. And like same thing with like the judges. Like there's judges in the front, like they can't see anything. Like I think some of them they even have like real like background dancers. So it's just like the background dancers are just doing their thing, and then they're just looking at a TV off frame. But it is cool to see that like they're doing all this stuff real time. With the face tracking, the body tracking, and it's actually decent. I mean, we've heard a lot about, like we did a lot of work with Corridor Digital, and they do some motion tracking now, and they talk about how much cleanup they have to do, because like things get jerky and weird, and like the fact that they're able to do it real time is like really impressive.
Yeah, I saw a couple examples recently of let's see, where did I know I shared it with internally. It was a real time sort of mesh of it was like deep fake live or something, and then the Unreal metahumans where it's like Tom Cruise's face. It's like,
Yeah.
That's pretty cool stuff. Was any of that there? That kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, AI is always the topic of these kind of things, and it's interesting with these Hollywood guys, and they'll say this themselves, so I feel comfortable saying it, that they are very resistant to change. So like new stuff, because I mean, think of their budgets. Like it's really hard for them to take a chance on something, take a chance on some new technology. And then the ones that do and that are successful, it's like, all right, well, fine. Now everyone's going to jump on the bandwagon. And so AI things, I think, are kind of at that point where, like, okay, we've gone through the hype. What can it actually do, like, to the quality that I can use it on a Hollywood film? Like, not where, like, oh, yeah, this is a tech demo, and, yeah, like, cool, neat. But, like, it can actually be useful. And so there's a bunch of things with AI. Well, a lot of it, interestingly enough, was about... tagging of footage so that they can use it for archival purposes and things, and auto transcriptions and like subtitles and language variations and stuff. But they were also, like the deep fake stuff. But interesting enough, like I think it's at the point where they weren't talking about it as far as like, is this good enough to use? Because I think we're already past that point.
Oh, yeah.
They were talking about it more about the legal side of things. Like, okay, you hired Tom Cruise to do a movie, so you have full rights to his image in that movie and like his voice and everything. What if you just take all of those things and make a deep fake and then make another movie and you put Tom Cruise in it? Is that okay? Is it not? Like technically you're only using things that you have full rights to.
Right.
But you're like converting it into something else. So like, do you have to pay Tom Cruise? Do you got to get his permission? Like, what if the actor is dead? Like, okay, well,
yeah, because I think it was Toy Story 3.
The Potato Head guy.
Yeah, Mr. Potato Head, the voice of Mr. Potato Head died, I think, before production began. So they just cut up previously recorded lines and like stitched them together for that whole movie. Like that's mind-boggling.
And that's highly manual though. Like they individually cut up words and like blended stuff in. This would be like, no, you just give the AI like, here's all of his lines that he's done in other movies, and you just type out what you want him to say, and he just does it. And so it's just making that way faster.
That's so cool. A little weird and creepy, but also like really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and I think we saw that with the Book of Boba Fett recently. So spoilers if anyone hasn't watched any of those. But Mark Hamill, I mean it was previous seasons too, but younger Mark Hamill, and like this year when they were doing it, it looked so much better, even just after a year or whatever. Like visually it looked really good. The audio was a little still off to me. It felt a little weird. But like, man, it's for what it was. Like that's amazing what you can do these days.
It's so cool. Yeah. What about you, Jared? What stood out for you?
The technology related to virtual environments, as Matt talked about doing that in real time. There was some of the vendors presenting there. One in particular had an FPGA solution for almost no delay virtual environments, and talked about how, you'll soon see kids with the ability to go right into a movie and interact with the character or the game, as it's happening. And volumetric capture, that stuff obviously is really interesting to me. I've done photography for years, so some of these things with what they're doing with light and focus really interests me, and the AI stuff too. We've already seen, there were some presentations on color. There's also, you've seen some of like what Matt's talking about. I think recently there's a lot of it wasn't AI, but there was a Kenny G album where he produced using some samples and computer assisted construction, where he did a solo, but they called it with the sound of Stan Getz, who's no longer alive and couldn't participate. So they'd sampled some of his notes and let the computer assist creating a melody he'd never played. Created a lot of controversy again, which was the focus of the conference, was kind of like intellectual property and rights. So it does create a lot of those questions. But Those were the things that really grabbed me, the virtual environments, and how we're going to see these things from gaming. I don't want to say start to creep in, but the way a game developer might approach something versus a director, producer, colorist. And I'm a big fan of that just because I believe when those different mindsets get together, even though there's kind of some butting of heads, you usually get a great art as a result of that. So the end production, I think, will benefit us all as the effects just get better and better. Those were the things I think that really impressed me the most, and where that's going to go as far as technology. It's like, geez, what's next after that?
Sure.
That's just so interesting.
Was there any talk about like virtual reality or like metaverse or anything like that?
Kind of.
Because like I feel like that's an interesting. I feel like virtual reality is still very much a gimmicky sort of thing. There isn't really a hook to make it like commercially popular yet.
Yeah.
Like video games and stuff are kind of cool and all that, but it still feels very gimmicky. But if there's like a movie that, like you were saying, Jared, that I could like walk around in or see what's going on maybe someplace else during the story arc or whatever, that'd be really neat. So I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that kind of. So they did bring up metaverse once, and a guy who was doing like a CES, like, hey, yeah, I went to CES this year. There was no one there. It was weird, kind of a thing. But the one thing he was saying is like, yeah, man, people are jumping on the metaverse bandwagon. And he showed a picture of like all of these like booth materials and stuff where pretty much they just did like a search replace for the word virtual and just like, no, it's metaverse. I'm just like, come on, guys. But also VR too, like VR storytelling and that kind of thing. I don't think this is the right group for that. Okay. We've heard in the past where like VR, it's very different doing interactive things where you can move around and stuff. Because like Hollywood and these guys in film, so much of it is about presenting you a very fixed story. So it's like making sure you see this in frame, making sure like you are catching the main story points, whereas something like that, virtual, there can be a wide story. I mean, at that point, it really is just it's a video game. Like those have even like gained in popularity, haven't they? Recently, like not fighting games, but more like exploring and story driven kind of games.
They sometimes they call them walking simulators, where there isn't really a lot of or like it meant like Myst kind of was, but it's not click through static scenes. You can actually move through the environment and things. Yeah, those are really cool.
So again, I don't think this is quite the right group for those kind of things. The one thing that it was interesting, so Jared was talking about gaming and like the marrying between the two of them. The one thing that came up in one session was about how video games, they cram so much information onto a screen, and so like they have to do things in a way that like you can actually consume it, and how that's changing like what they're doing. I think this was kind of in the context of broadcast again, where like sports, how much can they put on screen? How do they put that information on screen so that you can actually consume it all without it like completely overtaking everything? So think of like the scores and stats in a football game. They put that on the bottom. Like, how do you make that good without detracting from everything else that's going on? And how like they're starting to take cues from video games and like what younger people are trying to do. And what kind of caught me that was kind of funny is then they had a Q&A session at the end, and one guy just kind of shows like the whole like the whole mind space of a lot of these guys. He has a question of like, so I should be paying attention to what kids are doing and basing my decisions on that? It's like, well, you totally took the wrong like approach to this. No, you don't have to like cater to kids, but look at what the game industry is doing and like pull that in. It's just the whole resistance to change.
Yeah, I feel like maybe the question wasn't presented well, but that is an interesting like point of view. I for one, as the social media guy, I'm always trying to pay attention to what my teenager and I guess tween 11, 12, what they're doing with their devices and stuff. It is important because that's your future customer. Like that's your future consumer. So if you aren't producing content in either subject matter or in a format that is enjoyable and easy for them to consume, then you're just pandering to old people.
Yeah. In fact, the Fox executive spoke to that specifically when he addressed NFL coverage. They talked about how this was a generation that was tuning them out.
Yeah. And
it's a generation that wants to experience content from the inside out. So you think about like even our parents' generation or what what we came up with, I mean, I remember being so impressed by the Skycam, which wasn't even a Fox thing. That was an NFL Films thing. That wasn't even a broadcast thing. So then he talked about how they've kind of turned to that. And now you see they talked about how the NFL gives them a lot of leeway. So even in between plays, they have cams where they're right up, how they mic players, where they're able to places to literally bring, and you go watch that now and you see it, in the coverage, even the level of production blows me away. But that was driven by exactly, what Matt was talking about. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I think you see more of it.
I can't wait to see there'll be a little camera built into the QB's helmet or something. You can see it from his point of view.
They're working on that. They were talking about helmet cams on the players, on refs, all that kind of stuff.
I have to tell you, I'm a huge Formula One fan and a huge fan of their production app. I have to give them a ton of credit. I absolutely loved it this year because one of the things you can do is basically select your camera setups, pick your drivers, pinhole cams right behind. I mean, you can go to their level, which is to some degree terrifying for that sport, but it was very, very cool. It's I want to see this driver. These are the two things I'm kind of watching. And I think we're going to get to that level.
Yeah, actually, even wasn't there one of the guys who was even talking about F1 and how they're doing that? And he was talking about how me and my kid, we play Forza all the time. And so we wanted, that's kind of where some of this inspiration came was well, what have they been doing in racing sims and racing games for so long? Let's try those camera angles. And some of them don't work because, you can do things in a virtual environment, put a camera in the inside of a seat or to make things transparent. You can't really do that in reality, but apparently they took a lot of cues from that kind of thing. It's taking cues from gaming and seeing what you can do.
And to tie that in too, one of the AI productions that we saw was from NASCAR. Really, actually, it was a great piece that they showed, and it talked about how this AI can extrapolate footage and make high frame rate, slow motion footage basically through AI. Oh, neat. But they took this beautiful panorama, obviously, and I hope nobody's heard, but this NASCAR crash slowed down into this what you would think was something that was shot at this extremely high frame rate. So stuff like that, but where it was presented from the angle, I think it was on the bumper of one of the cars as you're going through this crash in extremely slow motion, debris flying. And flying. Wow.
It's only one out of every 5 frames was real. The other ones are just completely AI interpolated.
No, it's similar to the way where, you have programs that can extrapolate data and fill in, missing frames. Same thing. It looks at the data between them and says, okay, what do I need to fill to make this logical? It's really, really cool.
Wow. Yeah. So were you it looked good, right? You couldn't tell.
Oh yeah. No, it looked like it was shot on a what's that crazy high frame rate camera? It's not Phantom. Yeah. Something like that.
The Ronin one? I don't.
And if I remember, broadcast, they went to broadcast with it. But even that, at one point, I wish we had it. He had been at was it Daytona the night before? Had one of their technicians flying a miniature drone through the garage, and to the point, this one of the most talented. I mean, my brother's a military drone. I know the skill level it takes, and this guy was going underneath the cars as the technicians are working, and they're not even paying attention. He's hovering over the garage, going in and out of doors.
That was really cool. And that just comes back to that whole inside out thing that they're talking about, getting you more you're there and closer to things when you're there in person, or when you're there, watching it on screen than you could get even in person. Because I still remember watching football games. Yeah, back when I was a kid, there's one camera. It was all right, well, that's what you get.
Right.
Yeah, they used to have the 1 camera sitcom versus the 3 cameras. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a 3 camera show. Now they can have them everywhere. The way they can shoot it is just, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh man. There's a few things I wanted to touch on. Because you mentioned the cloud, but from the angle of distribution, not necessarily workflow. What was the deal with that? Because I feel streaming and whatnot is kind of it's embedded. That's what we expect as consumers is to be able to on demand, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the cloud stuff. So workflow is kind of a part of it, and so there's this thing called Movie Labs 2030 Vision, I think is what they call it. It's this is where we want to be as Hollywood by the year 2030, and it's very ambitious. I don't think it's going to be possible. Maybe it'll be possible for Marvel, Warner Brothers, those big guys. Maybe they'll be able to hit that, but it's not going to be mainstream at all. Where basically everything's in the cloud. As soon as you shoot like a video or record audio, it's immediately going up to the cloud. Which, first of all, like that part alone, like, all right, well, all of our internet infrastructure has to get like 100 times faster, and then maybe we can do it.
Big step.
So like there's that part, and then like actually doing all of the editing and VFX and color and audio, everything in the cloud, and like there's a lot of advantages because okay, you have a team, you're shooting in Seattle, you've got a team in New York, and hey, you're also hiring some people in overseas. Again, like I don't know, a lot of work is actually done out of like India, I believe now, especially in like VFX, and so like being able to just like all right, everyone is just logged into the cloud. That's it. All of the data just stays right there. You don't have to send anything over, make copies, and like you're supposed to return the copies at the end. But like, yeah, do they really? Well, I don't know. So like, single source of truth kind of thing, and like how that's like the end goal. And then too, like when you get to distribution, you don't have to like export and then upload to something else. It's just like, yep, it's done. Like there you go. It's already on the cloud. But they were talking so much about how that doesn't work right now, like that kind of workflow, because one thing that came up multiple times is that you can't just spin up a virtual machine, like put on Premiere Pro and Houdini and say that now you're working in the cloud. Like that is so expensive. And when Hollywood says it's too expensive, all right, yeah, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So they're talking about how like they have to completely redo like these applications. Like they have to be made to be run in the cloud. So you're doing it's more like in browser kind of thing rather than spinning up a virtual machine. And like, man, we're nowhere close to that. There are some things that are like starting, there's small stuff, but like you're not going to see like Adobe doing that for any time soon.
Yeah.
Or especially like Avid. And they also specifically called out that there are some things that are just going to be really hard to do in the cloud. VFX work, because you're using like the raw source things, you have to have the highest quality things possible. And like that's the hard part. Like the compute side of it, yeah, they already send it off to render farms. Like it's not a big deal. But the actual like visual, like the people working on it. Same thing with like color. Like, all right, you're playing a video over the cloud. Like this basically like, hey, I'm gonna do my color work on a YouTube copy of the video rather than like the original raw. It's like, yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of hurdles. There's still a lot of problems. A lot of them, they were saying that like, yeah, this whole vision about everything being in the cloud, like maybe we'll hit 2030, which to me then says like, all right, for everyone else, 2040, maybe. And that's assuming that like we don't increase in any existing technology. Like, okay, well, we're shooting 4K, sometimes 8K now. Are we going to be shooting any higher? Especially with like these LED volumes, well, how's that going to change all of this kind of stuff? Because like you can't do the processing. You can do some of the upfront processing in the cloud, but you can't actually drive the LED volumes in the cloud. Like latency and sync is already a problem. Having everything local.
I wonder if they would end up doing some sort of solution where it's kind of like a private sort of thing. Like we'll run or like you'll have an office in LA or I don't know, Tennessee or somewhere cheap that your remote workers kind of have a direct line to. That way, some of like the bandwidth issues and stuff are a little bit better. Private, private trunk. I don't know exactly. I'm not enough of a network nerd to know how that could work, but I feel like there could be some sort of more like smaller or private sort of solutions, connections, and things.
You can
do that on the audio side. I mean, there's people who work on the engineering. I did voiceover for years. Now that's done where they just tap directly in the studio and work with the engineer remotely. Through those type of lines, it is possible. Yeah.
And they were talking about like hybrid cloud is probably going to be the future, where you have like either whether it's on set or on like in your studio, a private cloud, and that kind of like syncs up to the main cloud. That has its own issues because then you get like it's like anyone who's done like programming, with like GitHub and stuff, like doing push and pulls and having to actually like merge things, like that's a pain. And now having to do that between like 400 people that are going to work on a movie, like you've lost one problem and made another. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff, I think the main takeaway is there's not ever going to be a one size fits all solution. It's always going to be maybe these people can do everything on cloud and that works for them, great. Other people, it's not because they're doing something different. Who knows, what things are going to do. It's just, I don't know. Like, I came out of this not worried about cloud because we get asked that sometimes at shows, like, "Oh, are you worried that like you're going to be out of business because everything's moving to the cloud?" It's like, no, no.
Logistically, yeah, you look at it and you just go, it's
Well, yeah, I mean, what was it? Adobe even just, I think it was at the last Adobe MAX we were at, was saying like, oh yeah, you can edit in the cloud or whatever as long as it's 1080p.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's there's just the it really does come down to the internet stuff. The bandwidth is just not available to your home to be able to do that in a realistic way. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's bandwidth, and I think it's also the hardware that the cloud is based on is not at all optimal for any of these kind of like workflows. Like the cloud is made like super parallel, like not per core frequency. It's just how many cores you can get. Whereas a lot of these other things, like I don't care if I have 50 cores. Like I need just one that's going to be fast.
right.
And so it's just like the cloud is not made for it. And some of that you can optimize, like if they're making a version of Premiere Pro that is completely cloud based, yeah, they could probably do some work. But like that's exactly what they've been working on for the last like 10 years anyway. Like it's not going to magically become easier because now it's on the cloud.
Yeah, I feel like Adobe's in an awkward position because they've built like their desktop software is just like layers on layers of versions and stuff. But then you have a company like Runway ML, and theirs is like a purely browser based editor, and it's really powerful stuff. But I think that it's because they've kind of started in the middle already. They haven't added a bunch of stuff to what an old core. They've deliberately built a product from the ground up with this solution in mind. And because like, man, they have everything from the roto brush sort of thing. You just double click and boop, that person's cut out, that you can remove stuff from the background. And it all works really well, I guess, in the cloud because it's like browser based. And I don't know if Adobe's like, they'd have to scrap and start basically from nothing to really.
I don't know. I don't think you have to completely scrap. I mean, they recently just redid a lot of their apps to make it M1 native, to work on ARM.
Sure.
It's like that's kind of the same thing. I mean, you're completely redoing parts of it, bringing in other things. The hard thing I think that's going to be the hardest for like these big guys, Avid, Blackmagic, Adobe, is like backwards compatibility, and that's huge in this field. I mean. What is it in Premiere? There's the legacy text tool that's been legacy now for like 6 years, and there's still people like, yeah, I'm using the text tool, and like now it's acting weird. It's like, yeah, because you were supposed to move away from that 6 years ago, and
just take it away.
Yeah, but then they just like, oh no, don't tell Adobe that. They'll just be like, no, it's gonna be problems. But like all of that old stuff, like if you go through like the effects list in like Premiere Pro or Photoshop or any of those, like it's hundreds and hundreds long, and like, yeah, some of them are kind of duplicates, but the problem is like people have a set workflow, and especially when you're up into this level, like Hollywood level and stuff, like making someone change their workflow, oh, that's hard. Like, we get a lot of people who are like, well, Blackmagic, DaVinci Resolve is so much better than Premiere Pro. It's like, yeah, all right, well, it doesn't matter what's better. What matters is what they're using. That's why so much of the industry is Avid. Like, Avid is, I'd say like Avid is not a better product than like DaVinci Resolve or Premiere. The reason people use it, and especially like Hollywood, is they know it. Like they know its quirks. It's got a lot of quirks, but they know them. They know how to get around them. Moving to something new, even if it's better, it's always going to have new quirks.
Yeah.
Yep, and I've heard that from more than a few visual effects artists. And in fact, I even sold a system to someone who said, "Yeah, I take." This particular studio is very married to this particular Mac and this particular way of working with Avid, and I take that and do it on your systems faster and then port it back over. But the point was, this is what they know and it works, and I understand that. Like I said, I cut my teeth learning Power Director because Premiere was a little bit much for me. Even that transition, as I started to learn just a slightly different way of doing things, you get very used to your workflow, and it really can be tough to adjust. So I do understand it.
And now they've got to learn Unreal.
Right? And that's a whole other thing too. Yeah. It's kind of cool though that we're seeing these kind of changes and stuff. I'm really, really interested to see how how this all just comes together and what people are going to do with it is really cool.
Yeah, and there's still a lot to go. Like, they're talking about even just like the LED volumes. Again, they're talking about all the pros, but like, there's all these cons. Like, they're not actually bright enough to do like daylight. So like, if you want to do that, you still have to set up your own light, like where the sun is supposed to be, and like it just shines down. So you still have to supplement lighting a lot. They were also talking about how since the LED panels are just RGB, just standard RGB, just like everything else we use, like that can look okay, but it actually results in color shifts. Like things that are supposed to be orange end up looking a little bit more red. And it's hard to get like to simulate actual like daylight, like the whole like the spectrum of it. It's hard to do that with just RGB. So they're talking like, well, let's add more LEDs. Let's make it red, green, blue, teal, cyan, and white. It's like, whoa, okay. Well, now you've just doubled like the complexity of the LCDs or the LED screens. It's like, all right, well, have fun with that.
Yeah.
So there's all that kind of stuff. There was also one of the things that I'm mostly interested in because like they're going to need a lot more computing power for it. So it's prime for us is what they called ghost frames. So these LED panels, they're not LCD, they're LED panels. They have crazy refresh rates, like 5,000 hertz.
Oh, right.
So like crazy refresh rates. So they're realizing like, well, since we're actually syncing the camera to the screen, we actually really don't need all of that. So what can we do? So what they're talking about is using what they're calling ghost frames. So you could have like frame 1, like the camera actually captures, and then frame 2, they lose the virtual background and it's just a green screen. So they just project green. And then, so it like alternates frames and you actually record them in alternate. And so that afterwards, if they need to do any VFX work, which a lot of these things, like they still do a lot of VFX work afterwards. They still tweak, add things, do changes. And so, well, hey, now we just have a green screen. Like we can just cut the actors out, like anything in the foreground. Like it's just they don't have to do rotoscope. It's just a key. And so like, that's super easy. So they can do that. And now they're even talking like, well, hey, what kind of sucks with these LED volumes is we can only have one camera. So hey, if we want to do multiple angles, we have to record multiple times and try to sync it up. But if we can already do this ghost frame, why don't we do like the first frame is like a straight on shot. The second frame is actually for a camera that's looking this way. The third frame is like a camera from like up here. And then we do a fourth camera or a fourth one that's just a green screen or whatever. And they just like alternate. So the background would like flicker basically. I don't even know if it'd be fast enough for you. I don't know how it would look in person. Yeah. But now they can do it. But every single one of those that they're doing has to have, a whole new set of like render nodes, things actually doing the screen and all the tracking. So you basically have to like, every time you double the number of like ghost frames or whatever, you're doubling the computing power. So for us, it's like, great, we can go from 5 systems to 20.
Yeah. Wow. So with that,
it's really cool.
Would you need, so I guess it would be, because the way I understand that these volumes are kind of powered, there's usually a number of systems that control, because it's not just one big giant screen. It's usually a multiples kind of stitched together. And so there's a system for each sort of section. You would need another system for each camera angle for each frame or for each panel,
which you already do. You already have to have like a system, or sometimes there's specialized hardware to do like camera tracking and syncing the camera to the background, because one of the problems with like these virtual productions, if you move the camera, if there's any amount of lag, like you'll get weird things. Like it'll look like it's parallax. I don't think it'd be screech, but it'll be like parallax, where like it doesn't quite look right. Like the background's not moving at the right speed, or like it might continue for an extra frame when really it needs to like start going backwards because they changed the direction of the camera. So it's basically just another layer on top of that. Well, okay, now you're doing all that. Now you're also syncing so that you're only recording, this camera is recording at this millisecond, and then this camera is recording at that millisecond, and the screen is changing at that millisecond. So it's just another layer of sync. But that part, it sounds like it actually isn't too difficult, since they're already having to do so much syncing. It's just like, all right, we'll just do another layer of syncing. But like, man, that sounds really cool. Like being able to do multicam in an LED volume, and now they need a whole bunch more computers.
A clever solution too.
Very clever. As long as it doesn't make your like actors throw up because the background's like it's constantly changing.
Yeah, you're talking that kind of high refresh like that is. Yeah, I could kind of see it going either way. Like you'd get that sort of weird like swimming, like this feels weird, or you just wouldn't notice at all.
Yeah, it might be the kind of thing where you could have one of them like is displayed for, well, because what is it? 24 FPS is the standard. So that's, oh, I don't know. I'm going to make something up because I don't want to do the math. Let's say that each frame is 10 milliseconds long. Maybe you could have like the first frame actually shows for 8 of those milliseconds. And then it's only the last like 2 milliseconds where it changes. So like our eyes visually, like you might see like a flicker, but you'd never be able to tell what the difference is. So really it more just looks like the screen just flickers a little bit. Like, so like, yeah, it's not great, but it's not going to make you puke.
Huh. So I guess the big question then is like, how does all of this, like, how do these takeaways affect Puget Systems?
Boy,
I think a lot of it. Sorry, go ahead, Jared. It's probably more your call.
Well, I'm thinking just along the sides of the integration, because it's going to be a matter of there's so many things which will all start from how does this get powered,
Sure,
and kind of go from there depending on the workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Where we come into that, I think will be constantly changing because the parts and the technology will be constantly changing. So I think, from the compute side, it's just a matter of trying to anticipate. And the one thing that I saw constantly in these presentations was how much of this is about planning and coordination.
Okay.
I mean, it's just so much, every shot, listening to them describe the number of cameras, the mapping through the system, everything down to what the colorist, lighting, director of photography, all those things. And this will be part of that equation more and more so as Matt described, takes more and more to do it.
Yeah.
More and more compute on it. So.
Do you guys think that there will be more of it? So basically all the stuff that we use is off the shelf stuff. Like it's things, parts and things that you can just go. I mean, theoretically you could go down to Best Buy and get and put it together. You'd mentioned earlier, Jared, about FPGAs. Is that sort of custom hardware going to be more prevalent? Is that something that we might have to look into?
I think like anything, you watch any industry and there's a point where standardization occurs. So I think that stuff is so new. I mean, you're talking about people that are inventors and experimenters tinkering with what to do next. But I think it'll obviously logically get there. I don't think, as Matt described, I think the ambition is always far ahead of, it comes at a slow pace. I've learned this long enough that those changes are slow enough. So I think it'll be there, but I think right now it's a matter of what's the best way to do this and how do we power it, and that'll kind of naturally come later.
Well, and I think some of it depends on what you're doing. Like they already have specialized hardware for things like camera tracking and sync. Like, okay, yeah, because that's doing the same thing every single time. Great. Things that like, what's powering the LED wall.
Sure.
I doubt that's ever going to become standard because they're going to want to always be able to utilize whatever the latest technology is. Okay. Like, think when like NVIDIA came out with the RTX cards with the ray tracing built in, like that's a game changer, especially for this kind of a field. So if there's something else like that, like, man, they're not going to want to use some specialized hardware that was, made 5 years ago. They're going to be jumping on the bandwagon because these LED volumes, again, with the ghost framing, the resolutions are just going to go up and up and up. The faster they can do changes on set, like be able to change, like, no, I don't like where that box is, move it over there. I don't like the color of that, let's redo that. Being able to do those things faster and faster and faster on set, like that's worth the money. Because I mean, remember we were talking, I don't remember if I mentioned here or another thing, but like some of these LED volumes, they're paying $100,000 a day. Yeah. And so really at that end, like that's $100,000 a day times 365 days a year. Okay, I mean, I'm sure it's not actually rented out 365, but whatever. That's, the cost to, even if they wanted to recycle their systems every year to get like 10% performance gain, that's a drop in the bucket. That's nothing. Like a couple hours of someone renting the area pays for new computers, easily.
Yeah, they're going to have to. I mean,
right.
Demand just to keep up.
That's it.
That's the thing with the demand. Not even the number of studios being built. It's just unbelievable.
How big they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't it one of them is like it's big enough they can put a 747 in it or something like that? Like that was their goal.
It's actually what we're partnered with, very excited about View Studios. So you see the way most of these are set up, and I don't have the render with me, but they're similar to the ability to surround the performer. But the wall then extends. I want to say it's 120 feet. He said they could fit a 737, I think it was, for filming. So
that's insane.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
And as you see though, everybody kind of takes it and then does their own little innovation, and we get that next step. No one has really done that yet. So here's this extended studio. It's like, okay, where is this going to go? Is this going to be these just production domes that we all exist in, like the Truman Show or something?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's an interesting thought too. Go ahead, Matt.
So, well, I was going to say the other thing too is like not everything can be digital. They showed a shot from the Mandalorian, like a top down, and it was like, no, the spaceship is half real because like the actor is like actually going behind it, interacting with it. But like from here back, the spaceship is fake, like it's visual. So they basically just like push up this model up against the screen, and I'm sure they have to do a little bit of cleanup afterwards, but to line it up and everything, make it look right. But like, so there's still like there's so much interaction between the art department, making models and sets and everything that still exists even with virtual production. The difference is now they have a virtual art department, and they're taking virtual things and making them real with like 3D printing and model making and everything. They're also taking real things and making them virtual with things like photo scans. So it's really cool to see like it's just doubling the complexity now because there's so much interaction going on with these things, and things like that is where I think we're still have a lot of room. So watching like what is happening in like the engineering field with like 3D printing, that's going to be very important for Hollywood and film here in the future because that stuff's just getting better and better and better too.
Nice. Oh, that's so exciting. That's going to be really cool. Well, we have just a few minutes left. Is there anything you guys would like to mention?
It was a good event. It was nice to be out in person at a thing. It was our first in-person event since the end of 2019, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Like that's nuts. Also, I guess if people are doing any other events, we are going to GDC this month. Never mind, it's March.
Oh yeah.
So we're going to GDC this year. We'll actually have a booth and presence there. We also are going to NAB in April, so we'll be there and present. So if you're going to either one of those, you look us up. We'll be there.
Come see us. Come say hi.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think we've actually. I think we've attended GDC before, but we've never boothed at GDC.
Yeah, I think this is our first boothing. Yeah, and I think we're still doing because game developer conference. So I think we're still focusing on like game engine or not game engine, but like game design and that kind of side of things.
Okay.
But man, virtual production is. I'm sure it's going to be a topic at GDC still too because it's. Man, those people can make a lot of money if they make the jump.
Well, yeah, it would be smart because I mean there has to be. If it was such a big presence at a Hollywood event, there's gonna have to be a presence there to try and say, hey, you video game people, like let's kind of come over here to movies, huh?
Yeah, maybe we'll try to tell them all to go to NAB, next month. Because NAB, like we're even doing stuff at NAB about virtual production. I'm pretty sure, and like virtual production is going to be huge. Like it's always been kind of big at NAB, but it's always been on the broadcast side. People standing in front of green screens with broadcast cameras. I think it's going to be a lot bigger this year about virtual production because, when was the Mandalorian? Was that 2019? Something like that. So like we actually haven't had an in-person NAB, I think, since like virtual production and LED volumes
we'll actually have
popularity.
Some stuff we're tied in with virtual production at NAB. Very, very exciting stuff with the company that's doing that. While that we talked about View Studios. So it's going to be all over the NAB and very, very cool. But we'll be front and center.
Yeah. So are you going there, Jared?
I am.
Awesome.
I'm excited. GDC and NAB. I'm going to be hitting them all.
All right, on. I kind of ran out of my own stuff. I feel kind of bad. We're a minute and 25 seconds shy of our normal hour. I was going to piggyback on what Matt said. Encourage people to check out Hollywood Professional Association online. There's a lot more to it than you would imagine. They have some very neat initiatives. Women in post, getting underrepresented voices, HPA All Conference, a lot of really, really cool specific initiatives. So whatever you might be looking to explore, I'd encourage people to look at it because it goes beyond just what you see on the website. Very, very engaging content, but very, very fun retreat. And this is the leading indicator of what's coming in Hollywood. We're gonna be seeing this and even more and more. Yeah. Oh, I'm excited. I'm especially excited to see how like video games or let me put it more as interactive content ties to film and television and in that way. Because they've seemed so separate before, and we're just getting closer and closer to where the consumption of it is. It's just blurring those lines.
Yeah, you almost wonder if instead of movie releases, we'll just have virtual world releases, and whether you want to interact with the film or the game or the character, whichever function of the world is your type of content. But
yeah,
who knows where we'll go?
Right. It's going to be really cool because like I feel, man, I can just see how like Bandersnatch, there was sort of a choose your own adventure style of that. I think it was like technically like a movie, I guess, or I don't remember if it was episodic or not, but like that sort of a thing. I can see that becoming more of a real or just more common, and I don't know, just things like that. It's really cool. I'm excited.
Maybe it's me being. So I was gonna say maybe it's me being pessimistic, but all I see is microtransactions. Like, hey, you want to explore like this person's apartment? Do it for $2.99.
That's only if EA gets involved with movie.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's just really cool, and I'm so glad that we're able to come to these events now, kind of in person. It just means a lot more, and I feel like it's a lot. I don't know. It just means more to be there, and you can actually see these things work and how they can. I don't know. It just gives a better understanding of the impact, I think.
Yeah. Well, one last thing. Now we're over our time now. Is one thing that a little bit surprised me, and maybe it shouldn't anymore, was how many people there knew us, knew Puget Systems. Both the people who are like, had like booths and they were showing things off, but also just like random attendees. So it's really nice to hear that, like, we've already, we already have authority even in these upper, areas. Like, we don't need to like bully our way into a new area. Like, we're already here. Like, and sometimes it feels like, I don't know, you have the whole imposter syndrome where you're like, oh, I don't really know. Like, we're really okay. It's like, no, we got to get past that. Like, yeah. We are very much an authority in this space already. So we should act that way.
That's cool. Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing, your experience and insights of this event. It was educational. I didn't get to go, so it was good for me, and I hope it was good for the audience as well. Yeah, this was really cool. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No. Any questions?
Nice to go out in person.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and I always like to thank the audience as well for taking time out of the day to join us on our Puget Systems podcast. We broadcast every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific. Some of our content is going to be pre-recorded, some of it's going to be live like this. So just mark your calendars for that. Wednesdays, 1 p.m. Pacific time, every Wednesday. Yeah. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.